Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, at this point you've been selected and sworn as the jury to try the case of the state of Florida versus Grant Amato. This is a criminal case. Grant Amato is charged with first-degree premeditated murder. The definition of first-degree premeditated murder will be explained to you later. The state's charging document, which is called an indictment, is not evidence and is not to be considered by you as any proof of guilt. It is the judge's responsibility to explain the law to you. It is your solemn responsibility to determine if the state proved its accusation beyond a reasonable doubt against Grant Amato in accordance with the law that I provide to you. Thus, the province of the jury and the province of the court are well defined and they do not overlap. This is one of the fundamental principles of our system of justice. Before proceeding further, it will be helpful if you understand how a trial is conducted. At the beginning of the trial, the attorneys will have an opportunity, if they wish, to make an opening statement. The opening statement gives the attorneys a chance to tell you what evidence they believe will be presented during the trial. What the lawyers say is not evidence, and you are not to consider it as such. Following the opening statement, witnesses will be called to testify under oath. They will be examined and cross-examined by the attorneys. Documents and other exhibits also may be produced as evidence. After the evidence has been submitted, the attorneys will have an opportunity to make their closing arguments. Following the closing arguments by the attorneys, the court will instruct you on the law that is applicable to this case. Following the closing arguments by the attorneys, the court will conclude with the final instructions. After the final instructions are given, you will then retire to consider your verdict. You should not form any definite or fixed opinion on the merits of this case until you have heard all of the evidence, the arguments of the lawyers, and the instructions on the law by the judge. Until that time, you should not discuss the case amongst yourselves. Your verdict must be based solely on the evidence or lack of evidence and the law. I now instruct you not to communicate with anyone, including fellow jurors, about this case. No communication includes emailing, text messaging, tweeting, blogging, or any other form of communications. You cannot do any research about the case or look up any information about the case. If you become aware of any violation of any of these rules at all, notify the court personnel of the violation. During the course of the trial, the court may take recesses, and you will be permitted to separate and go about your personal affairs. During these recesses, you must not discuss the case with anyone, nor permit anyone to say anything to you in your presence about the case. If anyone attempts to say anything to you or in your presence, tell him or her that you are on the jury trying the case and ask that person to stop. If he or she persists, leave that person at once and immediately report the matter to my court deputy, who will then advise me. All cell phones, computers, tablets, or other types of electronic devices must be turned off while you're in the courtroom. Turned off means that the phone or other electronic device is actually off and not in silent or vibrating mode. You may use these devices during recesses, but even then you may not use your cell phone or computer or electronic device to find out any information about the case or communicate with anyone about the case or the people involved in the case. Do not take photographs, video recordings, audio recordings of the proceedings or of your fellow jurors. After each recess, please double check to make sure your cell phone or electronic device is turned off. At the end of the case, while you are deliberating, you must not communicate with anyone outside the jury room. You cannot have in the jury room any cell phones, computers, or other electronic devices. If someone needs to contact you in an emergency, the court can receive messages and deliver them to you without delay. A contact phone number will be provided to you. The case must be tried by you only on the evidence presented during the trial in your presence and in the presence of the defendant, the attorneys, and myself, the judge. Jurors must not conduct any investigation of their own. This includes reading newspapers, watching television, or using a computer, cell phone, the internet, any electronic device, or any means at all to get information related to the case or the people and places involved in the case. This applies whether you're in the courthouse, at home, or anywhere else. You must not visit places mentioned in the trial or use the internet to look at maps or pictures to see any place discussed during the trial. Jurors must not have discussions of any sort with friends or family members about the case or the people and places involved. So do not let even the closest family members make comments to you or ask a question about the trial. In the age of electronic communications, I want to stress again that just as you must not talk about this case face to face, you must not talk about the case by using an electronic device. You must not use phones, computers, or other electronic devices to communicate. Do not send or accept any messages related to this case or your jury service. Do not discuss this case or ask advice by any means at all, including posting information on an internet website, chat room, or blog. What are the reasons for these rules? These rules are imposed because jurors must decide the case without distraction and only on the evidence presented in the courtroom. If you investigate, research, or make inquiries on your own, I, as the trial judge, have no way to make sure that the information you obtain is proper for this case. The parties likewise have no opportunity to dispute or challenge the accuracy of what you find. This is contrary to our judicial system, which assures every party the right to ask questions and challenge the evidence being considered against it, and to present argument with respect to that evidence. Any independent investigation by a juror unfairly and improperly prevents the parties from having that opportunity our judicial system promises. Any juror who violates these restrictions jeopardizes the fairness of these proceedings, and a mistrial could result that would require the entire trial process to start over. A mistrial is a tremendous expense and inconvenience to the parties, the court, and the taxpayers. If you violate these rules, you may be held in contempt of court and face sanctions such as serving time in jail, paying a fine, or both. In every criminal proceeding, the defendant has the absolute right to remain silent. At no time is it the duty of the defendant to prove his innocence. From the exercise of the defendant's right to remain silent, a jury is not permitted to draw any inference of guilt, and the fact that a defendant did not take the witness stand must not influence your verdict in any manner whatsoever. The attorneys are trained in the rules of evidence and trial procedure. It is their duty to make all objections they feel are proper. When an objection is made, you should not speculate on the reason why it is made. Likewise, when an objection is sustained, in other words, upheld by me, you must not speculate on what might have occurred had the objection not been sustained, nor what a witness might have said had he or she been permitted to answer. During the trial, it may be necessary to confer with the attorneys out of your hearing to discuss matters that require consideration by me alone. It is impossible to predict when such conferences may be required or how long they will last. When such a conference occurs, they will be conducted so as to consume as little of your time as it is necessary for a fair and orderly trial. Now, if you wish, you may take notes during the trial. You may, if you would like to, you may do so. On the other hand, of course, you're not required to take notes if you don't want to. That's left up to you individually. You've been provided with a notepad and a pen for your use if you wish to take notes. Any notes that you take will be for your personal use. However, you should not take them with you from the courtroom. During the recesses, the court deputy will take possession of your notes and will return them to you when we reconvene. After you've completed your deliberations, the court deputy will deliver your notes to me, and they will be destroyed. No one will ever read your notes. If you take notes, do not get so involved in note-taking that you become distracted from the proceeding. Your notes should be used only as aids to your memory. Whether or not take notes, you should rely on your memory of the evidence and not be unduly influenced by the notes of other jurors. Notes are not entitled to any greater weight than each juror's memory of the evidence. During the trial, you will be permitted to ask questions of witnesses in case you missed something, you did not understand something, or you need to clarify something. The rules of evidence apply regardless of whether a question is asked by the attorneys, by me, or by you. Therefore, there may be a legal reason why I will not ask your question. If I do not ask your question, you must not hold that against any of the parties. You must not discuss it with the other jurors, and please do not take it personally. Subject to that understanding, this is how we will proceed. When the attorneys have finished asking their questions, I will ask whether you have any questions. You may raise your hand to get my attention. I will give you time to write your question or questions on a clean piece of paper, and I ask that you please use a whole sheet and not tear it, and give the paper to the court deputy. I will then confer privately with the attorneys. If I ask your question, the witness will then answer, and then the attorneys may have follow-up if they choose. The questioning of a witness is a primary responsibility of the attorneys. If your question is not asked, you must not discuss it with the other jurors or hold it against either party. You are not obligated to ask any questions, but if it will help your understanding in the case, you may do so. Now, at this time, the attorneys will have the opportunity, again, to make opening statements. As I stated, an opening statement is what they believe the evidence will show. It is not evidence, and you are not to consider it as such. State, do you wish to make an opening statement at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
Thank you. First of all, let me wish everyone good morning. This is 2112 Silton Circle in Silviya here in Seminole County, as it appeared on the morning of Friday, January 25th, 2019. As you can see, it's a nice house, it's a big house, and it's on a lot of property. There are over 20 windows in that house. None of them are broken. None of them have any pry marks on them, nor show any signs of any type of forced entry. There are 5 doors to that house. None of them have any broken locks or latches. None of them have any broken or smashed door frames, nor any sign of a forced entry. Inside the house, there are several televisions, several expensive gaming systems, sound systems, valuable computers, 3 safes, and other valuable items, including jewelry. Nothing was taken, nor missing from the house. No signs of any type of home invasion, burglary, nor robbery. Inside that house, depicted in that photograph, are the dead bodies of Margaret Amato, Chad Amato, and Cody Amato, each shot through the head execution style. Margaret Amato. Margaret Amato, as you can see, she's sitting in a chair. She's slumped over at her computer desk in front of her computer with her face down on her keyboard. Margaret was the defendant's mother. Chad Amato, as you can see right there, is Margaret. Chad Amato is laying on his back, face up in the kitchen. Chad was the defendant's, Grant Amato's, father. A good way to memorize or to connect the two is Chad is dad. Chad is Grant Amato's father. Was Chad Grant Amato's father. Cody Amato, on the top there, is laying on his side in a fetal position at the threshold of the door of the house that connects the house part to the garage. Cody was the defendant's brother. Through the examination of Margaret's computer, e-pass toll records, surveillance video, phone records, witness testimony, a reliable timeline will be presented to you as to when each victim was shot in the head. Margaret was the first one to die. She was sitting at her computer desk, when she was shot in the left back side of the head with the bullet coming out her right cheek. The last human activity that took place on that computer occurred at 4:44 p.m. At 4 p.m., a call was made from the landline at the home, at that house, to a conference call service. 4 p.m., the time of that teleconference call, and 4:44 p.m., the time of the last human activity on that computer, took place before Chad and Cody arrived home from work. You'll see from the e-pass toll records for Chad and Cody, from the work time records for Chad, or surveillance video for Chad, and also witness testimony for Cody, that Margaret was shot and she was dead at her computer desk the late afternoon of January 24th, 2019, before Chad and Cody arrived home. Chad was the second one to die. He was shot once behind his right ear in the back of his head as he was standing in the kitchen shortly after he gets home from work. That first shot, Chad was shot twice in the head. That first shot occurs approximately 5:25, 5:30 that evening. Chad falls down after the first shot, gets him behind the ear, and literally goes through the side of his head. He falls down, he crawls around the kitchen counter to where he shot a second time in the back of his head, execution style. How do we know this? Once again, I'm referring to Chad now. How do we know this? Well, a combination of evidence that's going to be presented to you. Chad's iPhone almost exactly shows what Chad was doing when he left work until the time that he arrived at home, which includes how many steps he took when he got home and walked into the house. He had one of those applications. When he took those steps and the number of those steps that he took. Chad's E-Pass records show him going through the Dean Road Toll Plaza, eastbound on the road, Highway 408, at 5:02 p.m. on his way home. His E-Pass records. The crime scene photos that you're going to see shows a smearing of blood from where Chad was first shot to where he crawled around the kitchen counter and where he was shot a second time in the back of the head. The bullets were recovered, and you'll see that the first shot was recovered from an upper kitchen cabinet where Chad was standing when he was first struck. The second bullet strikes Chad in the back of the head as he's face down, goes through his head, and strikes the kitchen tile. Chad's lunch box or bag or container, you'll see photographs of it, which is lying on the kitchen floor right next to Chad right next to the kitchen counter, is the location where he was first shot behind the ear. And you'll see Chad wearing the same clothing, laying dead on the kitchen floor with that lunchbox nearby as he was wearing when he left work at approximately 4:30 that afternoon. From that surveillance video that I expect you're going to see, with that same lunchbox or container that he was carrying. Now, in a few moments, I'm going to talk about the evidence concerning the activity on Chad's phone. Activity that occurred both while Chad was still alive, by Chad, and activity that occurred on Chad's phone after he was dead by the defendant. Cody was the third and the last one to die. On January 24th, 2019, Cody leaves work at approximately 9:15 that evening. Cody worked at ORMC as a nurse anesthetist. You'll hear the testimony of a friend of Cody, a co-worker also, Christopher Sisko, co-worker and friend of Cody, that Cody left work that evening at approximately 9:15 on January 24th. Cody's E-Pass toll records show him going through the Dean Road Toll Plaza eastbound on the way home on the Highway 408 at 9:36 p.m. Moments later, Cody arrives home. He parks his vehicle under a makeshift kind of like carport, tents that are on the property, and I expect you'll see photographs of this, tents that are on the property that kind of serve as a makeshift carport. There's also a garage that has 2 cars in it, but Cody parks under that tent that's near the house. He gets out of his car. He enters the house through the garage, enters the threshold of the door that connects that garage to the house, as depicted in that diagram on the top there. And as he enters the threshold, he's shot once in the face immediately below his right eye, with the bullet going right through his head and out the back of his head. The bullet's going from front to back, from his right to left, and slightly downward. And Cody is found in a fetal position at the threshold of that door. And you'll just see photographs of all this. But the way the bodies of Chad and Cody, the way they were found by the police the morning of Friday, January 25th, and as depicted in those crime scene photographs, the scene photographs that I expect you're going to see, is not the way the bodies were positioned immediately after Grant Amato shot and killed them on January 24th, 2019. What the defendant did in this case is he staged a murder-suicide scene. And in order to do that, he planted certain items of evidence at the scene to give the appearance of a murder-suicide. I'm going to talk about that, of course, in a few moments. But what I first want to do is I want to explain to you the background regarding how the bodies of Margaret, Chad, and Cody were discovered by the police. Upon entering the house, they discovered the dead bodies of Margaret, Chad, and Cody. Originally, you'll see that they thought that Chad was the defendant in this case. They thought that Chad was Grant Amato. He's the one who was the victim, who was lying in the kitchen. But at first, they thought that Chad was Grant Amato. You'll hear the testimony of Todd Moterson. You'll see his body camera video as they entered and discovered the bodies of Margaret, Chad, and Cody. And you'll see the photographs of the scene and the bodies as they were first found or discovered by deputies Moterson and Matre. So that's the background to how the bodies were discovered. There were 3 items of evidence that the defendant, Grant Amato, planted to make it appear that Cody killed his mother and father and then killed himself. What he did was he placed a handgun near Cody's body and 4 shell casings in the vicinity of each body to correspond to the number of wounds. Remember, there are 2 gunshot wounds to Chad and 1 each to the heads of Margaret and Cody. He also placed a holster with a gun on it on Chad's right hip underneath Chad's belt to make it appear that there was some kind of confrontation between Cody and Chad that required Chad to arm himself. I'm now going to explain to you the evidence that will show that these items are planted. And in conjunction with the other evidence in this case, that I'll talk about in a few moments, that it was the defendant who planted these items of evidence. Four shell casings. The 4 shell casings that were found in the house match the gun that was found near Cody. Those shell casings were ejected from that gun. So it would appear, obviously, that that was the gun that Cody used to kill his mother, kill his father, and then kill himself. Well, so it would appear. That's what Grant Amato would like it to appear. But it's wrong. And the reason why we know it's wrong is because of this. The 4 bullets, once again, distinguish the shell casings from the bullets, the projectiles. The 4 bullets that killed Margaret, Chad, and Cody, and found and recovered at the scene, were not fired from that gun. They were not fired from the gun that was near Cody. The gun that killed the defendant's family has never been found. A FDLE, a Florida Department of Law Enforcement expert, Richard Ruth, will tell you, he's going to testify in this case obviously, that the 4 shell casings that were found in the house were in fact ejected from the gun found near Cody, but the bullets that were recovered that killed the victims were not fired from that gun. The gun that was found near Cody was excluded as firing those 4 bullets that killed Margaret, Chad, and Cody. Those 4 shell casings were planted there. They were put there. Those 4 shell casings are not part of the bullet. You know, by no means an expert. You will hear the testimony of an expert, but you have the bullet, you have the shell casings, and you have the projectile. The shell casings did not match, were not part of the same bullet. Those bullets are going to be excluded as having been fired from the gun found near Cody. They were planted there, they were put there. The third item that was planted, in addition to the gun found near Cody and the 4 shell casings, is the holster containing the gun found on Chad's belt. There was a holster, and once again, you're going to see photographs of these. There was a holster that was found on Chad's right hip. In that holster was a gun. Well, you're going to hear testimony and evidence that Chad is right-handed. The evidence is going to show that everything that Chad did was right-handed. The holstered gun was placed on Chad's hip backward for a right-handed shooter. This is a toy gun. That holster was on his right side, and it was like this. Additionally, a spot of blood was found on Chad's pants underneath the holster, and I emphasize underneath the holster. The significance of that is obvious, but it will be explained during closing arguments. And the medical examiner is going to testify. The medical examiner is going to tell you that all 4 of those shots, including the one that killed Cody, was not a close range shot. It was not a close range shot. It was from a distance. If a person's going to kill themselves, it's going to be closer, and you're going to get the powder burns on the head. The medical examiner is going to tell you that these are not close range shots. Cody did not kill himself. It was not a suicide. Now, regarding the positions of Chad's and Cody's body when they were found versus the position of their bodies when they were shot, they were moved. And let me explain to you why the evidence is going to show that. In addition to the back right ear, the shot to the Chad's back right ear, Chad was also shot in the back of the head. It went right through his head. You're going to see the damage that was done to the kitchen tile when the bullet went through his head and struck the kitchen tile. Chad's body was found on his back, and it was found 2 feet, maybe 3 feet to the left of the damage to the tile made by that bullet that went through the back of his head and into the tile in the kitchen. He was flipped over on his back after he was shot in the back of the head while he was laying face down on the tile. The medical examiner is going to tell you that bullet went through the back of his head, and you're going to see the damage to the tile. So he was face down when that bullet went through his head, and then he was flipped over, and you'll see the damage to the tile. You'll see the position of his body on the back with that holster in the reverse position on the right side, and you'll see that his body is to the side of the damage done to the tile by the bullet that went through his head. So he was flipped over. You'll also see from the evidence that Cody's body was not in its original position when he was discovered by Deputies Moterson and Matre. He was shot, clearly he was shot, that you'll see from the evidence, and went down at that garage / house door where the garage connects into the house. But you'll see from the evidence that while his body was found at that threshold, it was moved a foot or 2 from where he fell. You'll see from the photographs and a discussion of those photographs during closing argument why it's very apparent and evident that his body was moved. And finally, with respect to Cody's body, you'll see from the evidence that when Cody was shot, that door that leads from the house into the garage, it was open. Yet you'll see when the deputies arrived, and you'll see this in the body camera video, when the deputies arrived, that door was closed when they discovered Cody's body. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the evidence with you that shows that the defendant in this case, Grant Amato, was in that house for hours with the dead bodies of Margaret, Chad, and Cody. Grant Amato was in that house with the dead bodies of his mother, father, and brother for at least 2.5 hours. You're going to see evidence that puts him in the house probably longer. But for at least 2.5 hours, he was in that house with those 3 dead bodies. Once again, remember, Cody was the last one to die. Cody passed through that Dean Road toll plaza on his way home at 9:36 p.m., and he arrived at his home shortly thereafter. You'll see from a map that the house at Juliot is not that far from that toll plaza. Cody walks into his house and through the threshold of that door approximately 10 p.m. You'll see that he still has his work scrubs on. You'll see that he still has his badge, his work badge that's on his chest. So he's clearly coming home from work. Grant Amato's car, a few days later, was searched. Grant Amato was located on January 26th. But this is all to show you how we put him in that house for at least 2.5 hours with the 3 dead bodies. Grant Amato was located on January 26th, just 2 days after the murders. The search of his car was conducted, and in his car, his pants were found. And in his pants was a flash drive. Transferred onto that flash drive were the contents, the data of a computer that was located in Grant Amato's room at 2112 Sultan Circle. And most critically, after the data was transferred, you unplug the flash drive from the computer. That flash drive was unplugged from that computer at 12:27 a.m. Friday, January 25th. The defendant was in that house at least until 12:27 a.m. As I said, there's going to be evidence presented to you that puts him in there longer. But he was in that house until at least 12:27 a.m. the following morning, January 25th. At 12:08 a.m. on January 25th, more than 6 hours after he kills his father, Chad, he, the defendant, accesses his father's USA bank account using his dead father's iPhone. At 12:08 a.m. on January 25th, 2019, Chad's iPhone, his iPhone USA application, was accessed to add an account on for funds transfer. You access your account and you can add on to that account another fund to which you can transfer money. Well, at 12:08 on January 25th, Chad's iPhone, was accessed. His USA bank account app was accessed to add an account for funds transfer. The account that was added for funds transfer was the defendant's PNC bank checking account. The defendant was in Chad's USA app for 12 minutes. You'll see that through the forensic examination of Chad's iPhone that was done by the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, and through the USAA and PNC bank records. You'll see Chad's bank records from USAA, and you'll see the defendant's bank records from PNC. And you'll see that an account was added for funds transfer onto Chad's USAA account. Once again, that was done hours after Chad's murder. Now, on January 26th, when the defendant was located, he agreed to give an interview with the Seminole County Sheriff's Office investigators in this case. And to be sure, and you'll see it during that interview, he denies responsibility for hurting his family. In that interview with the police that was conducted on January 26th, the defendant admits to being home all day with his mother. He also admits to being home when his father Chad gets home. The defendant says that this occurred 5:30, 5:45 in the evening on January 24th, 2019. And he also admits to being home when Cody got home. Grant Amato, the defendant, says that occurred at around 10:30 in the evening. By the way, after lying to the police that he met Cody down the road or down the street from the house, and he also admits during that interview going onto his computer to back up some stuff, and that's his words, to back up some stuff onto flash drives. And remember that flash drive was unplugged from his computer at 12:27 a.m. that early Friday morning. Not once during that police interview, remember it's about 4 hours long, not once did that police interview did he ask about his family or ask them why he was there and why they were talking to him and questioning him. Immediately after being interviewed by the lead investigator in the case, Danny Anderson, and Danny Anderson is going to testify in this case, the defendant's brother, Jason Amato, is allowed into the interview room and has a conversation with the defendant. During that conversation, the defendant claims that he had nothing to do with hurting his family. But when Jason indirectly, and at one point, and you'll see it pretty much directly, accuses him of being responsible for the family's death, the defendant doesn't deny it. He was home alone with his mother all day when the last human activity occurs on a computer. He was home when his father Chad arrives home from work. And he was home when his brother Cody arrives home from work. All by his own admission. And in order to kind of set the stage for his murder-suicide story, when he's asked by one of the investigators, he's asked this question: what do you think happened to bring law enforcement to your home? The defendant, unprompted, his answer was that there was a shooting between Cody and my dad. And when asked why, his response was, Cody was protecting me or helping me or something with me. To give the appearance of a murder-suicide, the defendant on some other occasion fired 4 shots from Cody's gun, and you'll see that they had guns in the house. He was familiar with guns. You'll see that from the evidence. Actually all 3, Grant, Amato, Cody, and Chad. To give the appearance of that murder-suicide, the defendant on some other occasion fired 4 shots from Cody's gun, collected the shell casings, and then placed them throughout the house. After killing his mother, father, and brother with another gun, he plants those 4 shell casings in the vicinity of each body, and then he places the gun that matches those shell casings near Cody. Cody's gun did not kill them, did not kill Margaret, Chad, nor himself. Once again, those 4 bullets, those 4 projectiles that were recovered were excluded from having been fired from that gun that was found near Cody. And to further that contrived murder-suicide scenario, he places that holstered gun on Chad's right side. But once again, you'll see that it's placed in a position that would not be appropriate for a right-handed person and a right-handed shooter. And once again, you'll see that it was placed there after the shooting, by that blood being underneath that holster. The gloves. There are gloves in this case. The defendant was located at a hotel in Orlando on January 26th, as I mentioned, just 2 days after the murder. Found in that hotel, among other items in possession of the defendant, were a pair of black leather gloves. You'll see that these are not what are called range gloves, kind of gloves that you would use at a shooting range. They're not those kind of gloves. These are just regular cold weather, black leather gloves. On the outside of those gloves is gunshot residue. On the outside of the gloves, gunshot residue. On the inside of the gloves, on the cuffs of the gloves, is what is called wearer DNA, the defendant's DNA. Gunshot residue on the outside of those gloves, the defendant's DNA on the inside, on the cuffs on the inside. A 1 in 700 billion chance it's someone else's DNA. Now you're going to see other evidence in this case that puts those gloves on Grant Amato's hands. In December of 2018, he went on a trip to Japan. He went with his brother Cody and a friend by the name of Jericho Fine. Jericho Fine is going to testify in this case. And he will identify those gloves as appearing to be the same gloves that were found in the hotel room with Grant Amato that had the gunshot residue on the outside and the DNA on the inside, his DNA on the inside. And you'll see photographs of them in Japan. And those photographs will include photographs of Grant Amato wearing gloves that appear to be those same gloves. Now also note that when the defendant was interviewed by the sheriff's office on January 26th, he completely divorced himself from all guns. I got rid of all of my guns a while ago, and we can confirm that because you're also going to see evidence that in August of 2018, on 2 separate occasions, you'll see the records from the Florida Gun Exchange in Ormond Beach, that Grant Amato sold them a significant number of guns, both handguns and rifles. So he completely divorced himself from firearms, completely separated himself from them. But yet you have the gunshot residue and the DNA on those black gloves. But why? What was his motive? Why did he kill his family? The answer to that question lies and will be found across the ocean in Bulgaria and a woman named Silvie, if that's her real name. Grant Amato was and is obsessed with this woman. Silvie is an internet cam model. I put quotation marks around the word model, working from Bulgaria. The defendant, Grant Amato, became addicted to her, consumed with her, possessed by her, to the point that he was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of the family's money on her. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to, quote, be with her on our internet website. And he presented to her a persona that was not who he really was. A professional gamer, owned his own home, drove a BMW. That's what the persona was that he presented himself to her. And when his parents found out about his, quote, relationship with Silvie and the tremendous amounts of money that he was spending on her, they contacted her and they let her know the lies that he was telling her and who he really was. And that effectively ended his relationship with Silvie. Silvie now knew that Grant Amato was not a professional gamer, did not own his own house, did not drive a BMW. And to Grant Amato, that was the end of the world. There was nothing to live for. And he was furious with his family for ending his world, his life as he believed it to exist. But how do we know this? How do we know that? Well, Grant Amato told us this. On January 22nd, 2019, just 2 days before the murder, before murdering his family, Grant Amato typed an 8-page letter on his computer to 6 other men that were in that internet virtual room that interacted with Silvie. Jim, Josh, Ian, Sven, Frank, and Wolf. In the letter, which I expect that you're going to see, the defendant details his obsession with Silvie, the lies he told her and told the group, and his contempt for his family for revealing to Silvie that he was not who he portrayed himself to be. And how life, as he knows it, is over, that Silvie now knows that he's not who he put himself out to be. The letter contains the following, and it's typed on his computer 2 days before murdering his family. I lied to her and you guys from the beginning about myself. I'm not a professional gamer, did not own my own house, and did not drive a BMW. I felt intimidated from the onset of the room environment and felt like I had to be something far more unique than I was. My family found out about her, the website, and all the money I had been spending on everything. They would not have this and subsequently ambushed, put quotation marks around the ambush. They would not, that he did, Grant Amato, they would not have this and subsequently ambushed me where I was staying and forcefully signed me into a clinic in Fort Lauderdale here in Florida. The clinic's name was Cornerstone, if anyone was interested. This was an addiction clinic. They felt that I had an unhealthy addiction because of the type of profession Silvie has and the quantity of money that I had spent in the span of 6 months that I had known her. I was not allowed to leave the clinic, while I was there, I was not allowed to access to the internet. I did not have access to my phone. I did not have access to my computer. I was admitted in there until I was able to convince my family that I was fine and able to be released on January 9th. By this time, the damage was done. My family had hacked my computer at home, gained access to my phone records, and all my personal things related to Silvie. They then took it upon themselves to lie to her about so many things related to me, which in turn led her to believe me even less after I finally came clean to her about the lies I told you above. I should mention the stipulation for me to be released from the clinic was to go along with the lies my family had told her to poison my image that much more. While Silvie says that the reason why she can't forgive me is solely because of what I did, I can't help but feel that it is all part of it. Further, in this 8-page typed out letter, he says, I will never be able to forgive myself for making Silvie sad and betraying her trust in me. I care for her deeply and wish for an actual second chance with her and the room. I am willing to do whatever it takes to be able to show the real, with quotation marks around the real me to anyone and to build a relationship that doesn't involve lies. Everything between me and Silvie grew so fast. I hate myself for what I did, and I hate the thought of never getting to be with her again. After everything that I gave and everything that I tried to do with her, I just can't comprehend being without her. I am unable to function normally without her. Not hearing her good mornings or good nights. Not talking to her for hours a day. Not being a part of her room and her life outside of it. It's the most painful experience I've ever been through, and I will never get out it. I will never get over her, and I never plan to simply replace her with the next one. I truly love this woman at first sight, and I fell in love with her over the months that I got to know everything about her. She never believed that you could love someone so fast, but I did. I was part of everything to do with her, and now I'm reduced down to only being able to send her DM direct messages on her public Twitter. No private Twitter, no phone number, nothing. I send her messages every day, and I rarely get a response from her. Seeing her be able to be so happy without me in her life is something I hope you guys never have to live through. It's a feeling that makes you wish you did not exist in this world. It's a feeling that rips your heart out and makes you realize how pointless everything is without her. It makes you give up on life as I have without her. I don't think you guys would ever be as stupid as I was, but don't ever lose her. Don't ever do anything against her. And towards the end of that 8-page typed out letter, he says, I can't give up on her, and I will never, and the word never in capital letters, never go to someone else. She is my everything, and I will give her my life to simply be able to make her smile again. Don't ever lose her, guys. She is someone that you will never forget and never want to forget, no matter how painful. I hope I can be with her again. I'm sorry for what I did to her and to you. I'm truly sorry. Grant Amato was so obsessed with this woman. You're going to see from the evidence in this case, at 2:53 a.m. on January 25th, after leaving the house that contained the 3 dead bodies of his family, the defendant goes to a nearby Publix parking lot, logs onto their Wi-Fi, and uses his dead brother's USA checking account to pay $599.99 to get onto Silvie's website at 3:02 in the morning. That's how obsessed he was with that woman. That's what this case is about. It's about his blind obsession with this woman, the end of the world as he believed it to be because of his family, and his absolute contempt for those that he held responsible. That's what this case is about. Thank you.
May it please the court. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for your time and attention. Really appreciate it. Now, the most important concept of this case is a statement I'm going to go over for you right now. That statement is, if not Grant Amato, then who did this? Now, however, what I want to make clear is that that argument is not legally sufficient to convict Mr. Amato of murder. That is the most important concept in this case. If not him, then who is not legally sufficient to convict Mr. Amato of murder? Now, your legal duty as the jury in this case is to determine whether the state has proven that Mr. Amato is guilty of committing these murders beyond a reasonable doubt. Your legal duty is not, however, to determine exactly what happened in the Amato household between January 24th and January 25th, 2019. These are two separate questions, but your legal duty in this case is to determine whether the state has met its burden to prove Mr. Amato's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, Mr. Amato is not guilty because the evidence will show these 3 most important facts in the case. Fact number 1, a complete lack of physical evidence linking Mr. Amato to the deaths of his parents and brother. Fact number 2, Mr. Amato had no firearm with which to commit these murders because he had sold all of his guns and had no access to any other guns that may have been in the residence. And fact number 3, police, when they entered the home of the Amato family, found a nefarious combination of drugs, guns, and ammunition. The evidence will show that there is a complete lack of physical evidence linking Mr. Amato to these deaths. The evidence will show that his family members' DNA is not on any items that were recovered from Mr. Amato. That includes his clothing. The state tested Grant's scrubs and shoes to see if his family members' DNA was on them, and none of his family members' DNA was found on his scrubs or shoes. There is no evidence whatsoever of a cleaned up crime scene. No blood, no bloody footprints, no bleaching, no evidence of cleanup whatsoever. The evidence will show that Mr. Amato's DNA is not found on items belonging to his family members. The evidence will show that the state tested items found on Chad for Grant's DNA and found none. These items included Chad's belt that he was wearing, that was referenced earlier, the holster that was found on Chad, that was referenced earlier, and Chad's card holder. Once again, no DNA on any of those items, none of Grant's, and they were tested for such. Now, the evidence will also show that the shell casings from the fired bullets that were found at the house were also tested for Grant's DNA. The evidence will show once again that Grant cannot be linked to these shell casings because the DNA was not found on them and DNA tests were performed on these shell casings. Now, the state earlier had mentioned something about gunshot residue, and this is going to come up in the case. The evidence will show that gunshot residue testing was performed on the gloves that were found in the hotel room of Mr. Amato. Now, what's important about this testing, the evidence will show a low particle count. Now, the evidence will show what a low particle count means and why that's significant. The reason why that's significant, and the evidence will show this, is because it's more likely to obtain a low particle count from transfer than from holding an actual firearm. The evidence will show exactly what transfer means, but basically it means sitting on a surface or coming from a surface that had gunshot residue on it. And the low particle count, the evidence will show that that is how this occurred based on transferred gunshot residue and not the holding of an actual firearm that was fired. Now, the evidence will show that Margaret Amato, Chad Amato, and Cody Amato were all killed with a firearm, as the state had described earlier. The evidence will show that Grant Amato previously owned firearms, and that is something that we are in agreement about. However, the evidence will show that Mr. Amato sold all of these firearms in August and September of 2018. The evidence will show records of Mr. Amato selling 7 of his guns to the Florida Gun Exchange on August 21st of 2018. The evidence will show that Mr. Amato is selling 2 of his guns to the Florida Gun Exchange on August 24th of 2018. The evidence will show, finally, that Mr. Amato sold his final 2 firearms, a 9mm pistol and his shotgun, to Florida Gun and Pawn on September 23rd of 2018, and this evidence will be presented by third party, meaning we'll have a witness to show this. The evidence will show that Mr. Amato sold these firearms in order to continue being able to afford to remain in contact with Silvie. The evidence will show that he sold all of his firearms in order to maintain this contact and being able to afford to do so. The evidence will show at this time that Grant Amato owned no more guns and therefore could not have killed his parents because he had no guns with which to do so. In addition, the evidence will show that there were still guns in the home, but one was Cody's 9mm pistol and the others were locked up in Chad's bedroom. The evidence will show that Cody's 9mm pistol was his carry pistol that he took with him when he left the home. Cody would take this pistol to work, and therefore Mr. Amato had no access to this pistol at the time Cody, Margaret, and Chad had died. Also, the evidence will show that any additional firearms that were in the house were locked up in Chad's bedroom, safe, and closet. The closet was actually locked at the time the police entered the Amato home on January 25th of 2019. The evidence will show that not only did Mr. Amato sell all of his guns, but that he had no access to the guns that were left over in the home. The evidence will show that this is one of the main reasons Mr. Amato could not have shot his parents, because he had no gun with which to do so. In addition, the evidence will show that Mr. Amato is no professional shooter and has no training whatsoever in using a pistol. This is important because he would be incapable of committing these murders all at this time, with this frequency in this short amount of time, without such training. The evidence will show that when police entered the Amato home on January 25th of 2019, they found a nefarious combination of drugs, guns, and ammunition. The evidence will show that the master bedroom's connected bathroom, police found a large armoire that had been designed in a sophisticated way in order to produce significant amounts of marijuana. In addition, the evidence will show in the master bedroom locked closet, police found 3 mason jars full of marijuana that each had temperature gauges in them. Additional marijuana was also found in the bathroom connected to the master bedroom. The evidence will show the police also found several rifles locked in the closet, along with cans and cans of ammunition. Furthermore, the evidence will show that a Glock pistol was found in a holster, as the state had described earlier, on Chad Amato's body, and Cody's Smith & Wesson 9mm that he carried with him was found next to Cody's body. The evidence will show that Mr. Amato is not guilty because, to summarize, once again, number one, no physical evidence linking him. Number two, no gun with which to use it. And number three, the nefarious amount of drugs, guns, and ammunition found in the house. But also, there are additional significant pieces of evidence that will come out and that the evidence will show. That information is as follows. We expect the state to construct a timeline of what they believed happened in the case, which is something the state had mentioned earlier. However, the state will not be able to show medical evidence as the time of death. That is an important part. The defense expects the evidence to show how multiple pieces of digital evidence disprove the state's timeline in this case. The evidence will show that Chad Amato used his fingerprint on his iPhone to access his USAA banking application on 11:08 p.m. on January 24th, 2019, which is later than the state believes he was alive. You will see photographs of the body of Chad Amato. In those photographs, it will be clear as to why he could not have accessed, as a dead person, his phone using his fingerprint application after death, and why his body could not have been manipulated to do so. Furthermore, the evidence will show that Chad Amato used his iPhone to delete an application called Blink at 12:31 a.m. on January 25th of 2019, which is also later than the state believes that Chad Amato was alive. The evidence will show that Chad was told a week prior to his death to delete the Blink application by Cody. This is how the evidence will show that Chad Amato was the one who deleted the application at 12:31 a.m. on January 25th of 2019. This is how the evidence will show that Chad Amato was actually alive at 12:31 a.m. on January 25th of 2019. Also, there is a neighbor from the Sultan Circle area named Rodney Funk who will specifically remember hearing gunshots in the direction of the Amato home on the morning of January 25th of 2019. The evidence will show that these critical pieces of evidence will disprove the state's timeline of events in this case, which further supports Mr. Amato's innocence in the case. Also, when the police arrived to the Amato home, they actually entered the home. And what's important, when the state had described the lack of forced entry, the police in the case, when they had entered the home, also created no sign of forced entry. So when they entered the home using a pocket knife, caused no damage to the exterior of the home. So there are similarities in that after the police entered the home, they left no sign of forced entry. And when they had looked at the home initially, there was no sign of forced entry. Furthermore, they found wet blood around Cody Amato, and they found wet blood around Chad Amato. Evidence that also supports Mr. Amato's innocence is that he had no motive whatsoever to kill his family members. The evidence will show that the relation between Mr. Amato and his parents and brother will show a clear lack of motive. There was absolutely no friction between Mr. Amato and his mother, Margaret. The two were close, and she supported Grant to an incredible degree financially, along with Chad Amato as well. The evidence will show that Cody Amato and Grant Amato were inseparably close, and that even Cody took care of Grant financially to a significant degree. Cody even paid for a lavish trip to Japan, something that the state had mentioned earlier, that included Grant and their mutual friend Jericho Fine. The evidence will show that Cody paid for Grant's entire portion of the trip back in December of 2018, which was a month prior to Cody's death. The evidence will show that whenever Mr. Amato had an issue, Mr. Amato in this portion being Grant, that required monetary support, he received it from his father, mother, and brother. The evidence will show that Chad and Cody gave Grant their bank cards to make sure that Grant had monetary support. The evidence will show that Grant always had the support and that there was no motive whatsoever to kill his brother, his mother, and his father. The evidence will show, and you all will hear Grant's description of his actions on January 25th and 24th of 2019. Starting on January 24th, you all will hear that the evidence will show that Grant woke up on January 24th around 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. He was home with his mom and saw his dad leave for work that morning. This was a normal work day for his mother, who worked from home. Grant watched content online on the first floor during the day. That included materials having to do with video games and YouTube. Grant talked to his mom throughout the day and ate lunch between 12 and 1 p.m. Grant also took time during the day to prepare for a job interview that was scheduled for the following day on January 25th of 2019. The evidence will show that Grant had an interview lined up at a place called Express Scripts that was scheduled for the morning of January 25th. Grant made sure that on the 24th to go upstairs to his room, get his clothes and suit ready for this interview. Now, after preparing for this interview, Grant went back downstairs to the couch to watch YouTube. Around 4 p.m., Grant was watching YouTube and noticed his mother go to the kitchen, saw her put out pieces of chicken to defrost on the counter. He also saw his mom pour a glass of wine. He saw his mother take this glass of wine and go to the office. Grant then saw his dad arrive home at approximately 5:30, between 5:30 and 5:45 in the afternoon. The evidence will show at this time Grant was in the living room watching television. Grant saw his dad take his lunchbox with him into the office to talk to his mother. After his dad and mom talked, his dad came into the living room and sat on the couch with his mom, who was still in the office. The evidence will show at this time that Chad accused Grant of having contact with the woman that Grant had met online, even though this was against rules set by his father. The evidence will show that Chad was asking Grant why he was still having contact with this person. At one point, Chad physically grabbed Grant by the thin jacket that he was wearing and told him that he had to pack up his things and leave the house. At this point, the evidence will show that Margaret is still in the office. Grant then grabbed his duffel bag upstairs and also grabbed his clothes, gloves, and toiletries. Something else that's really important the evidence will show in this case that goes to the gloves. The evidence will show that on the night of January 24th, the temperature reached into the low 40s, so it was very cold that night for Florida standards. Chad went upstairs at this point arguing with Grant as he was packing up his things. At this point, Grant made clear that he needed his cell phone and car keys that Chad had kept from him. Then Grant and Chad went into the master bedroom, where Chad kept Grant's passport and car keys in the safe. When they were both in the bedroom together, the evidence will show that Chad told Grant that he would have to reset the safe passcode because Grant had been in the room while the safe had been opened. Then Chad went into his closet to retrieve Grant's cell phone and laptop and Grant's banking paperwork. Chad also gave Grant his credit cards and his car insurance information. At this point, the evidence will show that Grant went back upstairs to put his stuff into his duffel bag. Chad and Margaret were talking downstairs at this time. The evidence will show that Grant then went into Cody's room to retrieve flash drives that would allow him to reinstall programs to his laptop. After this, Grant then went downstairs with his stuff that he had packed up and went through the garage to put his duffel bag into the backseat of his car. Grant then went back into the house, back upstairs while his dad continued to speak to him. The evidence will show that Grant then grabbed his suit from his closet for his interview the next morning. Grant then grabbed some heavy coats and shoes because of the cold weather, and then he took them down to his car and placed them in the trunk. After Grant put his clothes in the trunk of his car, he spoke to his dad on the driveway for about an hour and a half. Grant then went back inside and upstairs, and at one point after Grant had returned upstairs, Chad came to talk to him and gave him a credit card for one night stay at a hotel. Grant then noticed that Cody had come home as he had saw headlights pull up to the home. Cody then came into the house and Grant saw Cody in the kitchen. Grant then left his dad and Cody as they were talking downstairs. Grant went upstairs to transfer files to his flash drive, something that the state had brought up earlier. Then Cody came into the room while Grant was transferring the files. At this time, Cody gave Grant his debit card for anything Grant needed to take care of himself while Cody tried to smooth things over. Grant made it clear to Cody that he didn't expect to be back to the house anytime soon. And the conversation ended with Cody and Grant talking both downstairs and walking out together. As they talked to avoid Dad, Grant said goodbye to his mother. And when Grant went to his car, it was between about 12 and 12:30 in the morning. This is when the evidence will show that Grant went to his local Publix because he knew he could get onto the Wi-Fi there at the Publix in the parking lot. Grant eventually turned on his laptop and used the Publix Wi-Fi internet to get the address for his interview the next morning. Grant turned on his cell phone and confirmed that there was no service. Grant eventually slept in his car and left for his interview the next morning around 6:45, 7 in the morning. Grant got to the interview location in Lee Vista area between 7:45 and 8 in the morning, which was early for the interview. Grant had his interview around 9:50 a.m., which lasted for about 45 minutes to an hour. You will hear evidence confirming Grant's attendance at this interview. There will be a third party, Erica Johansson, who conducted that interview that day, and she will be testifying in this case. The evidence will then show that Grant drove back to the area where the Publix was because he knew there was a Verizon store there so he could figure out how to get back onto having a working cell phone. This is January 25th. The evidence will show that Grant went into the Verizon store but was unable to get his phone back on because his father was the one on the account. Because his father wasn't present, he wasn't able to turn his phone back on. So after his time at the Verizon store, Grant at this time thought about going back to the house because he had checked his email earlier and had not received anything from Cody, his brother, yet, which he was surprised by. When Grant went to go by the house, he went down Lake Mills Road and saw a news van at the Fort Christmas Road intersection. Grant didn't turn down the Fort Christmas Road intersection after seeing the news van. Instead, Grant eventually went to a Panera at Waterford Lakes, where he brought on his laptop and used Google to try to find out why the news van was there. He saw something about shootings in Chuliota and that it was still under investigation. At this time, Grant had a bad feeling about it, but had no phone service, so he was not able to call his parents at that time, or his brother. At this time, Grant checked into the Hilton in Orlando using his debit card between 3 and 3:30 p.m. that day. Grant at this time was expecting to hear from Cody by email, which was what happened the last time that Grant had left the home to stay with his aunt. When Grant was at the hotel, he logged onto his email and still didn't see anything from Cody. He didn't use the landline to call them because he didn't remember the last time he had used a landline that night. And that night on January 25th, Grant watched YouTube and did speak to Silvie through Twitter that night. Now, before Grant went to bed, he wrote a note to himself on hotel stationery. Grant then woke up at 8 a.m., and when he went out of the hotel and started to leave his hotel room, he was detained by police. Now, at this time, the evidence will show that police did not tell him why they were detaining him. They gave him no information at that time about why they were talking to him and detaining him. He was not even told by Seminole County police officers who were there why that had occurred. At this time, Grant agreed to go to the station with the Seminole County police officers, and he agreed to do so and let them know that. Grant was at the station for 7 hours giving an interview in this case. The evidence will show that during all of the time that police officers were questioning Grant throughout the day, they lied to Grant repeatedly about what evidence they claimed to have had against him. The officers told Grant provably false statements about what they claimed to know, and in the face of these provably false statements, the evidence will show that Grant denied all involvement in the deaths of his family. The evidence will show the emotion Grant has when he finds out what happened to his family. The evidence will show Grant crying in the interrogation room as he sat there by himself after finding out the deaths of his family members. The evidence will show that police officers released Grant after the interview because they did not have the evidence to support an arrest. The evidence will show that after 7 hours of time in the police station, Grant was released from the police station after consistently denying having anything to do with his parents' and his brother's deaths. In summary, the evidence will show that after his family members died and were deceased, Grant went to, or it was unclear about the time of death because you're not going to hear about the medical evidence at that point, but at least when he left the home, he went to a Publix. Then he went to the interview the morning of January 25th and stayed at a local hotel, making no attempt to leave the area. Grant then agreed to go to a police station for an interview that required his presence for 7 hours, and the evidence will show that afterwards he was released due to lack of evidence. Getting back to the most important things about this case, if not Grant, then who is not a legally sufficient argument to convict Mr. Amato in this case? Additionally, there is no physical evidence linking him. Mr. Amato had no gun with which to perform these murders, and a nefarious combination of drugs, guns, and ammunition was found in the house. Based on these facts, Mr. Amato is not guilty in this case, and accordingly, Mr. Amato had nothing to do with his parents' and brother's deaths. Therefore, after all of the evidence is shown in this case, we will request you all to return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.